is denounced as a dictator, doesn't allow free press. If there was a military coup here, say in the New York Times, supported it, they'd of course be allowed to publish freely afterwards. I mean, who could doubt that? The main organization that the U.S. is supporting, Sumate, supported the coup openly and the destruction of democracy. But therefore we support them in the interest of democracy promotion. And if you're properly educated, you don't notice things like that. It's one of the things education's for. Well, that's going on right now. Well, Central America was pretty much subdued, at least temporarily, by Reaganite terror. But the region from Venezuela to Argentina is falling out of control. And that's quite serious. Venezuela is forging closer relations with China. It's planning to sell increasing amounts of oil to China. That's part of its effort to diversify export and reduce its dependence on the openly hostile U.S. government. And in fact, Latin America as a whole is increasing trade and other relations with China, also Europe, but China is more worrisome to the United States, with very likely expansion. That's in particular true for the raw material exporters like Brazil and Chile. And China is investing in Latin America, challenging U.S. dominance. If you look at U.S. documents, public documents, China is regarded as the main potential threat, not a military threat. In fact, of the major powers, it's been the most restrained in military expenditures. But it is a threat. The threat is it can't be intimidated. When the U.S. shakes its fist at Europe and tells them to stop investing in Iran, the Europeans obediently pull out. China just moves in. They've been there for 3,000 years, don't care much about the barbarians, and still don't, and they can't be intimidated, which is very frightening. Just put yourself in the situation of a mafia don, and suppose there's somebody who can't be intimidated. That's scary. And international affairs is pretty much like the mafia. In Latin America, China's just moving along. Elsewhere, too, you may recall last spring, the Bush administration decided to insult the president of China. He came to visit Washington, and they insulted him by not allowing him to have a state dinner, only a state lunch, big insult. He took it pretty calmly, and what he did was fly off to Saudi Arabia, where he entered into new trade relations, investment relations, and so on with Saudi Arabia, which is the oldest and most precious U.S. ally in the Middle East, because that's where mostly the oil is. So fine, we won't have a state dinner, but meanwhile we'll take away your the jewel in your crown. Okay, fine. Well, going back to Venezuela, it joined the Mercosur, the South American economic bloc, which isn't doing much but may someday. That was welcomed by Kirchner, president of Argentina, and Lula, the president of Brazil. It was welcomed as opening a new chapter in our integration. Venezuela also supplied Argentina with fuel oil to help stave off an energy crisis. And most important, Venezuela bought about a third of the Argentine debt. That's one element of a region-wide effort to free the countries from the controls of the International Monetary Fund. It's after 2 decades of disastrous effects of conformity to its rules. The way Kirchner put it, he said, the IMF, International Monetary Fund, has acted towards our country as a promoter and vehicle of policies that cause poverty and pain among the Argentine people. That's what he said when he announced his decision to pay almost $1 trillion, in his words, to rid Argentina of the IMF forever. Radically violating IMF rules, Argentina did enjoy a substantial economic recovery from the disaster that was left by IMF policies. Other countries are going in the same direction. Steps towards Latin American independence advanced further with the election of Evo Morales in Bolivia last December. a real democratic election of the kind that doesn't take place in the West. It's worth talking about. The election of Rafael Correa in Ecuador a few days ago was another step. Morales moved very quickly to reach a series of energy accords with Venezuela, and he committed himself to reversing the neoliberal policies that Bolivia had pursued rigorously for 25 years, leaving the country with lower per capita income than at the outset. Well, in fact, throughout South America, the governments that are now supported by Washington, and they lead opinion, might have been subjected to U.S. violence and economic punishment not many years ago. So take, say, Lula in Brazil. His policies aren't all that different from Goulart in the early 60s, but his policies led the Kennedy administration to instigate a military coup, which was the first neo-Nazi style national security state in Latin America. It led to a plague of repression throughout the continent. Now Lula is the great hope, with policies not dissimilar. Well, that's one of the signs of independence in Latin America. Since Lula is now one of the good guys, it was necessary to ignore the fact that the first thing he did after his reelection recently, first thing he did was fly to Venezuela to offer his support to Chavez in the upcoming election, and also, as he put it, to promote regional integration with Chavez by inaugurating a Brazilian-built bridge across the Orinoco River and overseeing work by Brazil's state oil companies. The indigenous populations are becoming much more active and influential. Many of them want oil and gas to be, and other resources, mines and so on, to be domestically controlled. Or in some cases, they oppose production altogether. Some are even calling for an Indian nation in South America. That's challenging a race-class divide. Race and class are very closely correlated. A race-class divide that goes back to the Spanish conquests. The elites that run the place are white, European. Population is, they call themselves Indians or black, and that's a sharp distinction. The internal economic integration is also taking place for the first time since the Spanish conquest. And Latin American elites in the past, the white elites, have been linked to the imperial powers, but not to one another, and that's beginning to change. In fact, Latin America is now, I think, the most exciting part of the world, and there are opportunities for cooperative development and interchange, which are quite real. One step towards that is the solidarity movements that developed in the United States in the 1980s. That was something new in hundreds of years of Western imperialism. No one in France ever thought of going to live in an Algerian village, or no one here thought of going to a Vietnamese village to live with the people, to help them and support them and just to protect them with a white face. But that started in the 80s on quite a substantial scale, thousands of people, many of them coming from churches, evangelical churches. The internal, and that's a mass popular movement in the United States, now all over the world. The internal developments in much of Latin America, as you know, are strongly influenced by mass popular movements. They're coming together in the global justice movement. Well, just where all this will lead, nobody can say, but there definitely are opportunities now for real progress towards more freedom and justice in cooperation across the hemisphere, extending beyond. These are very welcome prospects, and I think to make use of these opportunities is the critical task for today, your task right here, and I very much hope that these meetings will be very successful in carrying forward the very impressive work of City Life Vida Urbana in the past years and make the right to the city a living reality and carry achievements beyond. Thank you.